Alright, we're talking about some crazy moon landing conspiracies.
Are they real? Are they not? A lot of outlandish claims are going to be made today, so your job is to either prove us right or wrong in the comments.
One of the biggest questions on a lot of people's minds is, why haven't we been back to the moon? There were a handful of missions from 1969 to 1972, and then that was that. Yeah, we went a few times, nothing left to see here. Now NASA has said they've just turned their attention to other projects, but really? We don't want to do any archaeological digs up there, see if we can find any signs of maybe alien life having visited at some point? You know, build some crap up there maybe? Nothing? Interest in exploring the moon has basically dropped off completely at this point, and that's led some to believe that we never even made it up there in the first place.
Okay, next up we have the fact that all of the original footage of the Apollo 11 moon landing taken by the NASA organization somehow got erased. Yeah, I think I'm gonna have to call BS on this one, because first of all, how the hell do you just accidentally erase the footage of one of the most historically important moments of all time? And second of all, if the footage was actually lost or erased, how did it not become an international scandal ending with somebody publicly losing their job and being collectively condemned by the entire country? In 2006, NASA said the tapes were lost, and then in 2009, they claimed that the tapes had ended up in a pile with 200,000 others that became degaussed, meaning magnetically erased. I mean, you're kidding, right? The tapes were then restored by experts, meaning that if someone were to claim that the tapes are fake because of the fact that the video has clear markers of alteration, all NASA would have to do is claim that those alterations were necessary in order to restore the video. I'm just not buying it.
Another detail many moon landing deniers point to is the Neil Armstrong reflection discrepancy. Allow me to explain. In this iconic photo of Buzz Aldrin on the moon, eagle-eyed conspiracy theorists noticed something quite peculiar: Neil Armstrong's reflection in Aldrin's visor. That's not the peculiar part, I'm getting to it. The plot thickens when they realize Armstrong's hands are seemingly empty, prompting the question, where on Earth, or shall I say, where on the moon, is Armstrong's camera? Did Armstrong even take the photo at all? NASA insists he did, but it doesn't look like it. If not him, then who though? Did E.T. decide to snap a pic for them? Or was this whole thing shot on a soundstage in California? Or of course, there's the possibility that NASA must have some snazzy, like, cameraless photography technology up their sleeves. Now, some people say it's just a case of perspective and timing. Armstrong's camera was positioned in a way that it just wasn't captured in the reflection, but I don't think Hannah's next point is gonna be as easy to explain.
Next up, apparently not only does NASA spread misinformation, but they also distribute disingenuous artifacts. In 1963, after NASA supposedly successfully completed the Apollo 11 mission, 3 of the astronauts visited the Netherlands, during which time the United States ambassador accompanying the trio gave the Dutch Prime Minister what he claimed was a moon rock, but has since been identified as nothing more than petrified wood that has never been anywhere near the surface of the moon. When this information came out, the US Embassy was unable to explain why that would have happened or how, but they claim they were investigating. Whatever that means. None of you should be surprised to learn that the supposed investigation went absolutely nowhere, and to this day there is no reasoning behind why the Netherlands would have been given a fraudulent artifact once valued at $500,000 US, but now valued at around $70.
Here's another hot take. What if the moon landing really was a success, but there are just details we haven't been told? Maybe on that last mission to the moon in 1972, they saw something that made them never want to come back. We may look at images of the moon and see it as nothing but an empty mass of rock and sand, but there's a whole side of the moon humans have never set foot on, the dark side. And we really aren't 100% sure what could be lurking over there. There's a good chance it's just more of the same boring crap we have on the light side, but could there also be an entire species of creatures dwelling in the dark craters and recesses of the moon? Could these creatures have slithered from their shadows to give a grave warning to the astronauts of the Apollo 17 mission to never return? To buzz off? Possible.
Next up, we have the death of Gus Grissom, an incredibly popular astronaut who was an incredibly outspoken critic of NASA's space program during his time working for the agency. While Grissom did become the third person to fly into space, he still didn't believe that NASA had either the knowledge nor the technology to make it all the way to the moon, an opinion he wasn't afraid to share with the public. While training for the Apollo 1 mission, after communications failed during a test, Grissom stated, "How are we going to get to the moon if we can't talk between 2 or 3 buildings?" He also picked a lemon from his backyard and tied it to the spacecraft as a joke, saying that the technology was a lemon and not nearly advanced enough to make it to the moon. In another controversial move, Gus held an impromptu, unauthorized press conference criticizing the space program. Many believe that because of all of this, NASA, in collaboration with the CIA, decided to take him out. During an underground simulation, a spark underneath Grissom's seat ignited a fire that claimed the lives of himself, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. Some people believe that the 3 men actually died after cyanide gas was released into the cabin to kill them, and that the fire was used as a cover-up, but as always, I want to know what you think.
Here's another fishy part of the whole moon landing thing, all those sick pics Buzz and Neil took up there. Some of them look really a little too gorgeous and pristine. Now, it's not like you couldn't get quality pictures back in the late 60s. I mean, like, have you seen 2001: A Space Odyssey? That movie looks like it could have come out last year. But for 2 astronauts untrained in the ways of the camera, having just risked their lives flying up to space, who have then just set foot on a place no one has ever set foot on before, out in space, like, with all that excitement, all those nerves, somehow they're gonna snap these cinema quality pictures? I've looked through old family photo albums. Even home pictures from the 90s look like junk. So my point is, what's the deal with that?
Speaking of the Space Odyssey, what if what we are all thinking right now is true and the moon landing was really faked? Because of course we are all thinking that right now. Well, how the hell would they have done it? The answer to that question is actually quite simple. Stanley Kubrick. You know, the guy who directed A Space Odyssey as well as The Shining. Well, many people believe that the guy not only directed award-winning movies, but also internationally deceiving publicity stunts as well. Shortly after footage of the moon landing was released, Kubrick got to work on The Shining, which was absolutely chock full of references to the Apollo 11 manned mission to the moon. The first and most obvious being that the character Danny is wearing an Apollo 11 sweater in the film. The second being room 237, which didn't actually exist in the hotel where the movie was filmed, but was added in reference to the moon, which sits just about 237 miles from Earth. Room 237 is also the room in which Kubrick supposedly staged the moon landing in the NASA headquarters. As we heard James say, clearly he had the technology. We saw it in Space Odyssey, so this is probably just Space Odyssey Part 2, another day at work for the guy. You can also see Tang cans, which are a space food made for astronauts in the movie, and the carpets in the movie have a pattern matching that of the launch pad in which Apollo 11 took off from. Did they though? Did they?
On any movie set, you also need some props, right? For example, Hannah and I's wardrobe here at Most Amazing Top 10 is carefully curated and tailored on the daily. Well, one photograph taken on the moon shows a rock with a very intriguing marking on it, something that looks a lot like the letter C. You see, some folks scoured photos taken on the Apollo 11 mission and were surprised to see the C, so they analyzed what they saw and decided this one rock must have been a fake. See if you can see this C in this photograph they saw. I certainly see what they saw. That's a C to me. So the question is, how did the great Stanley Kubrick, of all people, manage to let something like this slip? It's almost a bigger mystery in itself, right? I mean, he must have been pretty spaced out. He had spent all this time working on 2001, after all, which came out the year before the Apollo 11 mission. Maybe he was just bored of all the science fiction stuff and got a bit lazy. I can see it.
So, if the moon landing really was faked, why was it faked? Well, there's a few reasons as to why the United States would have wanted the rest of the world to believe that they were capable of becoming the first nation to make it to the moon. One, of course, being bragging rights, or in political terms, national prestige. A demonstration of the nation's amazing scientific and engineering capabilities that could be used as an intimidation tactic during the Cold War. It also incentivized foreign countries to invest in and become allies to the United States, so a bit of a win-win there for them. Not to mention there was also a massive amount of political pressure on the US after President John F. Kennedy challenged its greatest minds to succeed in sending a man to the moon before the end of the decade. They made it just in time. Coincidence? You tell me, but here's the thing. You're going to tell me that no mission prior to Apollo 11 was a success, but all of a sudden, a team of 3 astronauts make it to the moon and back completely unharmed? I don't know. It seems pretty far-fetched if you ask me.
The circumstances of the mission make a hoax highly plausible. In the midst of a Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union, showing who was more technologically advanced was paramount. So either side had every intention of coming out on top. For a powerful nation like the United States, this could have given the government all the motivation they needed to force results by pulling one of the oldest tricks in the book, good old-fashioned hoax. When worst comes to worst, just trick them. I mean, hey, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures, right? Now, of course, there's no way we can confirm or deny this 100%, but I wanted to start with this point because now we're going to take a look at some more specific details and sort this whole thing out once and for all. In at number 9, we have one of the most common critiques of the Apollo moon landing footage and photographs, the lack of stars. Not just lack of, actually, there are no stars to be seen, just a flat black background. Now, we've all looked up at the night sky and seen the endless cluster of stars above, especially those of us who don't live in big cities. The sky is filled with the things. So how is it that these astronauts who are all the way up in space on the surface of the moon itself didn't capture any stars in their footage? Now, you may be thinking, well, even if it is a hoax, they could have still put stars in the background, so this doesn't really prove anything, but I'm not so sure. The endless void of space coated in twinkling stars would be a pretty difficult image to replicate, especially in 1969. So perhaps they opted to just leave them out altogether in hopes that no one would notice. But we noticed. I noticed. Perhaps you did too. The waving American flag. Once Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong had successfully landed on the moon, they planted the American flag into the rocky terrain. It was a glorious representation of America's first place victory in the race to space. Everybody clapped, unless you were, of course, living in the Soviet Union. Perhaps then, maybe you shed a tear. And the dreams of children across the world had finally come true. One day, maybe they too could take a trip to space, they all thought. But some skeptical viewers once again saw something fishy in the footage. Flags. Flags are known to blow in the wind. That's kind of why they're made the way they are. Things look cool when they blow gloriously in the wind. Only there's just one problem. There is no wind in the vacuum of space. So it seems odd to me that the flag would be blowing as if it were perched on a porch by a seaside town. It's been said that it was set up specifically to create the illusion of blowing in the wind, but to that I say, possibly, but possibly not. It's amazing what kinds of excuses people will make when they're caught red-handed making silly mistakes. Alright, still a firm believer in the moon landing being real? Well, let me throw another monkey wrench into your beliefs. In one famous photo taken of Buzz Aldrin, we see Neil Armstrong in the reflection of his visor. Now, any reflection is going to show exactly what's right in front of it. So why is it that there doesn't seem to be a camera in Armstrong's hands? Perhaps someone else took the picture, but it was said there were only 2 of them there. So once again, I cross my arms in disbelief, sir. This one has been apparently explained by NASA, saying that Armstrong had a camera mounted in the front of his suit, but I still don't see it. Where is the camera? Hashtag, where is the camera? I want to know. Maybe NASA is refusing to admit that there was a whole studio crew involved in this so-called mission. And speaking of a studio crew, let's talk about the man who very well could have directed this hoax of a moon landing, Stanley Kubrick himself. Is it not strange that just 1 year prior to this spectacular moon landing taking place, Stanley Kubrick released his classic film 2001: A Space Odyssey to critical acclaim? Now, not only is this movie incredible, based on its story, but visually it actually holds up. I saw 2001 a few years back when it was released in theaters, and honestly, it looks like it could have been made today. The ships look real, it's fantastic. It looks like they're actually flying through space. So, the idea that replicating a space landing in a Hollywood studio backlot would have been beyond human capability at the time of 1969 is simply not true. It could be done. Perhaps members of NASA saw Kubrick's film. What am I saying? Of course they did. They're space freaks. Of course they went to see it. And then they made Kubrick an offer he couldn't refuse. Perhaps the moon landing is Stanley Kubrick's most controversial film, right behind A Clockwork Orange. Wouldn't surprise me. The man was a genius, and he didn't seem like the type who would run his mouth and reveal any big secrets. Speaking of film quality for a moment though, let's talk about the quality of the photographs themselves. This was 1969. These men were in space. They were not professional photographers, they were astronauts. So why did these photographs look so high quality, almost cinematic? Some of them look like images from movies you'd see on the back of a DVD. If you don't know what a DVD is, I suppose you're too young. DVDs were movies that you could buy. Yes, as I just discussed, movies could look exceptional, even back then, but I must stress once again, Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong didn't make a living as cinematographers. Have you ever looked at family photos from the late 1960s? They look like crap. Even with the access we have to high quality cameras right on our phones today, we still get terrible pictures. And they were in space. I, for one, would not be calm and collected enough to take an amazing photograph. But if you're in a studio with Stanley Kubrick on set, you know what I'm getting at. Next up, we have similar backdrops. In a number of photos taken on this moon photo shoot, people have pointed out several instances where the backgrounds appear all too similar. It's almost as if they were filming in a studio with rather limited space at their disposal and only a certain amount of matte paintings backdrops. Now, yes, this is the moon. It's not like there's much to look at, and sure, maybe several of the pictures were, of course, taken close together, but some of them were stated to have been taken miles apart, and yet they don't appear to have been. For two men that had an entire moon to themselves, you'd think that the backgrounds would have looked a bit more varied. Instead, we see photos, the same hills, the same rocks. Well, I'll tell you what I think. I think that I'm not fooled. Proof of props. In the plethora of pictures that were supposedly taken on the moon, there's one rock that some hawk-eyed skeptics have pointed out, a rock that seems to be labeled with the letter C. Now, unless a crew of Martians landed on the moon before us, who also happened to share our alphabet, it seems highly unlikely that a space rock would have a perfectly shaped C etched into it naturally. This has led a number of people to deem this rock a prop. Perhaps it was turned over by accident, or the photographer accidentally took the photo at the wrong angle, but I, for one, find this very suspect. What does the C stand for? Maybe it's just how the props are organized. A, B, C, and so on. You know how the alphabet goes. Or maybe this C stands for con, or cheat. Take your pick. Some have pointed that what appears to be a C on the rock didn't actually appear in the original NASA prints, but who's to say really? When we take the other evidence into account, again, it seems highly suspect.
Let's get started. In our number 10 spot, this theory is a little far-fetched in my personal opinion, but some theorists believe that the footage was filmed in a studio and the editors reduced the speed to slow motion in order to mimic the low gravity conditions. It has been suggested that if you increase the speed of the footage by about 2.5 times, the astronauts appear to be moving in Earth's gravity. They also believe to account for the astronauts jumping high, hidden cables and wires were used. Number 9 takes us to the discrepancies with their shadows. On the moon, the sun is the only strong light source, meaning all of the shadows should be parallel with one another. However, this is not the case, because seen in all the videos and photographs, the shadows fall in different directions. This made many people believe that there there must have been multiple light sources, which suggests that the landing photographs were taken on a film set. NASA argued that the uneven landscape was the culprit for the strange shadows. So in at number 8, we have the small impact crater. This conspiracy theory suggests that if they really landed on the moon, there would be a sizable blast crater underneath the lunar module after landing on it. On all of the footage or photographs of the landing, there wasn't a visible crater. The surface of the moon is covered in fine lunar dust, but even this doesn't seem to have been displaced while landing. NASA combats this theory by stating that the module required significantly less thrust due to the low gravity conditions that it would have done on Earth. So everything just seems to have some sort of explanation. In at lucky number 7, we have the mysterious object. When the photographs of the moon landing was released to the public, theorists noticed a mysterious object in the reflection of an astronaut's helmet from the Apollo 12 mission. They claimed that this object appeared to be hanging from a rope or wire, which led to some to suggest that this is an overhead spotlight that can typically be found, of course, in studios. To this day, this object still remains unexplained, but due to poor quality of the photograph, maybe this was done on purpose, I don't think we'll ever gonna know what this object really was. Up next, in at number 6, let's talk about Van Allen radiation belt. The astronauts en route to the moon had a trajectory that would pass through the Van Allen radiation belt. The belt is held into place by the Earth's magnetic field, and it is known to stay in the same place. The Apollo missions to the moon were the first ever attempted to transport humans through this belt. Many people believe that the levels of radiation emitted from this belt should have cooked the astronauts when they attempted to pass by this belt, despite the many layers of aluminum coating they had on. However, NASA argued that the astronauts were only exposed to this radiation for a short amount of time, so they only received a very small dose of it. Blowing its way into number 5.